Hi, I'm Jeremy, the Zoo Nerd, coming to you live from my backyard in Los Angeles, California. How's everyone doing today? I hope you're well. I hope you're happy, healthy, and having some fun. Today in LA, it is a nice, toasty, warm day. Last I checked, it said it was 102 here at my house, so I'm going to try to keep this a little shorter and stay in the shade to be a little more cool. Today is Catterday, so I'm going to focus on another species of cat, and it may be one you haven't heard of or are very familiar with. Today we're talking about fishing cats. As their name implies, they eat fish. They also spend a lot of time in and around water, which is a little unusual for most cats. Most cats don't usually like water, usually stay pretty far away from it. Fishing cats are a great exception, as well as jaguars and tigers, which both enjoy water quite a bit. But fishing cats don't just eat fish, they also eat small birds, especially things like ducks, rodents, reptiles, shellfish, amphibians, poultry, and sometimes bigger animals that have been killed by something else that would be considered carrion, already dead. They will sometimes scavenge the food of bigger predators and eat what is left. They come from South and Southeast Asia. They're kind of sparsely populated over several different countries, with kind of unsure ideas of where else they may live. They're not very well documented or very well studied in the wild. We know for sure they live in Bangladesh. Recently they've been sighted in Cambodia. They're definitely in India. They're sometimes seen in Myanmar. They're seen in Nepal quite often. They were documented in Pakistan not that long ago. They're seen in Sri Lanka quite a bit, and occasionally in Thailand, and a while ago in Indonesia and Vietnam. That may sound like there's a lot of habitat for them, but it's pretty sporadic when and where they show up. And sometimes it's years between when scientists and researchers see fishing cats in an area again. So either they're super secretive or there's not very many of them out there. We still need to do more research to really know which it is. They typically live in wetlands. So think kind of swampy areas, but also areas that maybe flood on occasion. Some of those areas are at the base of the Himalayas in northern India and Nepal, kind of right at the base of the big tall mountains, where there's always a lot of rain, but also in the spring a lot of snow melting, and it kind of becomes a big floodplain for much of the year there. They also live along coastal areas, and particularly important to them are the mangrove swamps. Mangroves are trees that are very specifically adapted to living in standing seawater. So they're pretty specialized, they're pretty unique, and they're a very important and endangered habitat. Mangroves help protect coastlines from erosion during big storms like hurricanes. They can also help minimize the effect of things like tsunamis. And they provide vital habitat to a lot of different animals, including fishing cats. Fishing cats will also live in some grassland areas and some forest. Typically, if they're in those areas, they're near a very large river or lake or pond or some sort of water system. So the way that they fish for fish is pretty genius. They'll sit on the edge of the bank and they'll just take their little paw and they'll slightly tap it just on the top of the surface a little bit. This creates ripples across the water, and fish will often mistake that for thinking that there's insects up there. Now the fishing cats have to prepare for where they're going to hunt, and usually they're hunting in low light, so either early in the morning, late in the day, or sometimes in the middle of the night. And so that little movement, they then hide back in the shadow and can't be seen. And when the fish comes near the surface, they pop it out with their paw and bring it up on shore. Or if it's a big fish, they dive in after it, which is pretty remarkable, as most cats really hate water. Fishing cats are very well adapted to spending some time in the water. In addition to their great technique of fishing, they actually have webbing between their toes. So that helps them to be really great swimmers, and it also helps them to walk in some really slimy, slippery mud on the shoreline without sinking too far deep into it. Their bodies are kind of covered in this grayish olive-colored fur that helps them to blend in really well. They also have both stripes and spots that help them to hide in the shadows, which is important for them to sneak up on some of their prey. They are considered one of the small cats. If you're not a big cat, you're a small cat, so they're in the small cat family. But they're actually one of the bigger small cats. They're about twice the size of a house cat or the size of a medium-sized dog. They range from about 22 inches to 45 inches in length. So that's about 2 feet to up to almost 4 feet for a really big male. They're only about 14 inches tall at the shoulder, and males weigh between 18 and 30 pounds. Females weigh quite a bit less, between 11 and 20 pounds. They have a short tail compared to other cats kind of their size. Their tails are between 9 and 16 inches long, and they have very powerful, stocky bodies that make them really good swimmers and pretty good climbers, which is important for some of the rugged terrain that they live in. They also have a highly adapted coat of fur. So they actually have 2 layers of fur. Their shorter, more dense layer that we don't see as well is very tight to their body, and that helps trap a lot of air in the hairs right next to their body. And so if they're in and out of the water a lot, that helps to keep them warm. Sometimes the water can be kind of cold in some of those areas, especially during the wintry times, and that will help insulate them so they don't get too cold. Their longer outer layer has pretty good length of hair onto it, and that helps it to dry out really well once they're out of the water and back up on the shore. It is generally believed that they are mostly solitary, but there's really not a lot of evidence out there. They haven't been documented very well, so we're still learning a lot. Sometimes in a zoo setting, they've been somewhat social with each other, and in a couple cases, the dads have actually stuck around and kind of helped raise the babies, which is pretty rare. Some zoos can actually keep 2 adults together, which is also pretty rare for some cats. So they may be a little more social than a typical cat, or more so than we may think otherwise. It's also believed that they're nocturnal. Most of the time that they're captured on like a camera, a motion camera, it's at night. Sometimes it's early in the morning, right in those early hours of light, or sometimes it's late in the day, right before the sun goes down. But they tend to be nocturnal from what we know. They are also can make a wide variety of vocalizations. So they make a chittering sound. They make some screeches, some yowls, some hisses, some growls, and a deep meow sound. All of those sounds kind of help them to communicate with each other, and they think that that is why they are largely solitary, using those vocal communications to communicate, and also defining a territory with urine scent marking. That means they pee on things all around as they walk. Domestic cats will do that as well, especially if they haven't been spayed or neutered. When 2 adult fishing cats breed, the gestation or pregnancy period for the female is about 65 days, so not too long, just over 2 months. And then she gives birth between 1 and 4 kittens, 2 being the average. When they're born, they're little. They're only 6 ounces. They're born blind. They can't really move much on their own. So she kind of creates a little den area, keeps the kittens very safe, nurses them until they get bigger. Their eyes open kind of about 2 or 3 weeks in, kind of like domestic cats do. And then they'll start to follow her around a bit. They're full size by about 8 months old, and then they stay around for another 2 months learning how to hunt and fish. And then once they've got that skill down, they are out. So they're on their own by about 10 months old, and usually able to reproduce at about 18 months to 2 years old. It's assumed that they typically can live 10 to 12 years, probably a little less in the wild, a little more in captivity, although there really isn't a whole lot of study on that. And it's very rare that wild fishing cats have been documented for a lengthy amount of their life. Babies are usually born in the spring. They do know that. That's when food is going to be more abundant. That's usually the wet season, so the babies are little tiny while it's super wet, and as they get bigger and ready to hunt, that's when the water is going to go down in like the flood area, but that means that food is going to be more and more prevalent, which is perfect for teaching babies how to hunt and be responsible adults. They are listed as a vulnerable species, which means that their population is decreasing, and that if things don't improve for them, they could enter being endangered and then possibly further down the road extinct. It's not a dire situation, but it does mean that more protection, more study, more research, and more observation is needed if we're going to have fishing cats around far into the future. The major threats across their habitat are kind of two different things. The biggest one is habitat loss. In many of the areas and the countries where they live, people have huge populations. India is one of the most densely populated human countries on the planet, and that's actually one of the places fishing cats live the most. And the habitat they live in is being changed very quickly, very dramatically by people. Mostly for agriculture, to either grow crops or to raise animals for people to eat. Things like fish farms, shrimp farms are big parts of that, especially in those coastal mangrove areas. And sometimes they're cutting down the mangroves to use that wood or wood fiber to make paper, to make lumber. All of those things are problems too. Also, some areas are being drained for wetlands to divert that water into places where they use it, irrigation to grow crops. And in large portions of their habitat, they are hunted or poached. Sometimes that is a conflict with humans for retaliating killings. Fishing cats have been known to attack livestock, particularly chickens and ducks. But occasionally they'll go after babies of other species too, like baby sheep, goats, and cows. And so if you're a farmer raising those animals and a cat's out there trying to kill the babies that your animals have just had, you would probably want to try to stop that cat and may try to kill the cat in the process. Many of these areas are very poor, and so in some places people also hunt fishing cats as a source of food. So they will actually eat the cats themselves. They will also sometimes sell their skins for money, or other parts of their body, particularly claws and teeth, if there's someone willing to pay for it. So those are all threats for them. Our special shout out today is an organization called the Fishing Cat Conservancy. They're a really cool organization. I've never heard of them until I started researching them today a bit more. But they work specifically in India, in a lot of the mangrove forest on the southern eastern coast of India along the ocean, where they are helping to restore mangrove habitats. They've actually helped local people take fish and shrimp farms that were no longer very productive, that were struggling to raise fish and shrimp, and they said, you know what, this isn't working. It might be better to turn it back into mangroves and let it be a natural place. There are benefits to people for having that. It can help protect your land. It can help protect you from big storms. And they're also teaching the local people that in the mangroves, there are other things that they can do. Particularly, there's species of crabs that live in the mangroves that the people can harvest and eat, and that's a really good source of protein for them. And they can do so in a very eco-friendly way. with a sustainable population of those crabs living. So I'll be posting some information about the Fishing Cat Conservancy and the great work they do in India. My experience with fishing cats is very, very small. I've seen them in a couple of zoos. I've seen them in San Diego Zoo. The photo I posted earlier today is from the Denver Zoo, where they have a really cool exhibit. They also had a baby born a couple years ago, so I think there's video footage of that I'll share a bit later. And a fishing cat was in a show at the Cincinnati Zoo that I saw, which was super cool to be able to see the cat dive into a shallow pond and retrieve something. It was really cool, showing off the cat's natural abilities. If you're ever in Cincinnati and go to the Cincinnati Zoo, check that out. I believe it is still part of their show there. But that is pretty much my experience. I've never worked with them. None of the zoos I've worked with have had fishing cats. They tend to be kept at zoos that are a little further north, whereas like hot zoos tend to focus on kind of species that live in hotter areas a little bit more. Fishing cats tend to be in places where there's a little more water and places where they're a little more comfortable weather-wise. I hope you've enjoyed what I've shared with you about fishing cats today. I'll be putting up more information on the Facebook profile later on today, so make sure you check that out. And yeah, that's pretty much it. As always, feel free to like, share, follow, and subscribe to any of my information across the platforms, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, and on my website at jeremythezoonerd.com. Until Monday, be happy, be healthy, take care. I'll see you Monday. Bye.